You know, I think at this point the whole retro FPS thing has really become its own genre, and there's no shortage of these games coming out in the near future. The latest one to make this list is a game called Nightmare Reaper, which looks like a combination of Wolfenstein 3D, Rise of the Triad, as well as Brutal Doom and Heretic. It's been developed by Blazing Bit Games, and though it's not actually out yet, I was contacted by the developer to see if I'd like to preview it and give my thoughts on the whole thing. And because I'm a huge shill and they also threw in some hookers and a truckload of cocaine, I thought I'd do a video on it. Hopefully also to drum up a bit of hype for when it finally hits early access. Now, the story in this thing is ambiguous at best. As far as I can tell, you're a young woman in some kind of mental hospital for reasons not entirely divulged. Without anything else better to do, she's confined to her imagination, where she drifts off into these horrible nightmares that turn her into the protagonist of a violent FPS. When you finish a level or you get killed, you wake up back in your room at the hospital and can hear the screams and wailing of nearby patients, along with a conveniently placed journal entry that gives away a new piece of information to your character's backstory. The real core of the game are the nightmares, and this is where you actually get to run around and start shooting things. So every time you go to sleep, you're transported to a new level with a map to explore, keys to find, treasure to collect, and enemies to kill. Each episode or chapter, I guess, has 4 levels, which take place in different locations like villages, mines, or caves. Basically any kind of dank, dark, pitch black shithole the game can throw at you. Levels offer up a little bit of verticality, but nothing major, and there's the odd secret area here and there to discover as well. And then in between all of this murder, you can upgrade your skills by playing this little minigame on this handheld gaming console. A minigame which has a map screen that looks suspiciously like Super Mario Bros. 3. This is a cutesy little platformer that looks like something from an early 90s DOS game, and it just kind of involves avoiding zombies and wizards and collecting coins as you try to finish each level. Anyway, all of the coins and the treasure you collect from killing and completing levels goes right back into this mechanic, upgrading your damage, your movement speed, and adding in higher ammo pools and a whole bunch of other incremental upgrades. And the whole thing's pretty fun and kind of addicting. Once you start unlocking some of these upgrades, it gives you a sense of a purpose and desire to keep moving forward, along with being fed these little tidbits of information that tie back into what storyline the game has. It's this constant sense of reward that keeps the player hooked. I kinda got a bit of a sucker punch vibe to the whole thing too, with the main character being this young woman that's stuck in an asylum, using her dreams and imagination as a means of escapism, and you really do want to find out what happened to her. And of course, if you don't care about all that crap, you can just ignore it and go to the next level, which is fine. Nightmare Reaper's real claim to fame though is just the sheer amount of weapons you can bugger around with, and there's just a whole heap of them even in this early access build. In the current version there's supposed to be about 32, with the full version having 80 all up, which is kind of insane. Weapons are pretty varied too. There's pistols, revolvers, grenade launchers, chainsaws, swords, remote explosives, through to more magic based weapons like ice spells, fire spells, lightning spells, and magic staves. And on top of all of that, every single weapon has an alternate fire mode, so there's a whole heap of options here. It's kind of staggering. I could sit here for hours going through every weapon until I bled from my asshole, or spend another hour shooting at a skybox and showing them all off. But part of the fun I think is coming across these yourself in the game and just experimenting with what works best. Can't even imagine how they're gonna work in another 50 weapons on top of what is already in the lineup, like it's crazy talk. Ammunition is broken up between light, heavy, and magic to make things easier to manage, and every weapon falls under one of these categories, which should be obvious by looking at them. So you'd think a pistol would use light ammo, a grenade launcher uses heavy, and a fire spell uses magic. Makes sense. And then on top of that, they come in different states of rarity too, with common, uncommon, rare, and legendary, giving it a bit of a light RPG element. The more rare the gun, the better enchantments it might have too, like increased knockback, extra damage, and that kind of shit. Even after playing for 3 hours, I was still coming across new guns, and I think this is definitely a highlight of the whole game. Also, combat just feels incredibly satisfying, especially with the bigger weapons like the grenade launchers and the RPGs, where you can just fire into this group of enemies and watch their blood and guts fly out in every direction. The faster you kill enemies, the more combo points you rack up too, which means more coins and faster upgrades. The sound effects are really meaty and punchy, and I never felt like any of the weapons were useless or underpowered. I mean, there's definitely guns that are better than others, but every weapon has a use and a purpose. One of my favourite weapons are the remote bombs you can throw out, which just destroys clusters of enemies in a single blast, and just hearing this explosion and seeing pieces of enemies blasted into the sky is just badass. The grenade launcher I think is pretty decent too, and once I got a hold of this thing, it was my go-to weapon for pretty much the rest of the game. At the end of each level, you're able to choose one weapon to hold on to, giving up the rest for bonus coins. Then you start off with that one weapon for the next level and have to go back through and collect everything all over again. I think the only thing I didn't find all that useful was just some of the melee weapons, because quite often you're up against a bunch of enemies in these opened up areas, and trying to get in close with a sword or an axe to sit on someone's face was just a bad idea. But you can tell a whole lot of effort has been put into making the shooting side of things feel tight and responsive, and it really does. It's probably mechanically, I think, one of the best aspects that Nightmare Reaper has to offer. There's no quick saves, no checkpoints or any of that. You have to finish an entire stage in one go. But that's fine, the combat is challenging and tricky, but it feels punishing enough without being cheap or unfair. I mean, most of the time anyway. So overall, the game's not going to suck your dick, but it's not going to kick you while you're down either. The problem is that some of the time the whole thing is just incredibly visually noisy, to the point of it actually obscuring your vision and making it hard to see what the hell is happening. It can be hard to differentiate the difference between what you're shooting and what's being shot at you, and trying to avoid taking damage just often goes out the window, because it's just this kaleidoscope of shit exploding across your entire field of view. Kinda reminds me a lot of those Doom mods like LCA and Project Brutality that just added in a bazillion new visual effects, and it's the same issue I've got too with Nightmare Reaper. It's just too much at times, man. It's too goddamn much. You know the old saying, less is more? Well, this might be something for the devs to think about. Maybe just kinda toning this stuff back. Doesn't help that the game is super dark at times too. And don't give me that crap about just turning up my brightness. All that does is wash out the image and mess with the black levels. It doesn't fix the brightness issue. It's like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. All of this is also going to affect the performance side of things, I think, as well too. Now, on my computer, I didn't have too many issues with the frame rate, though there were times when it definitely started to chug along when the action picked up. At least so there's a whole bunch of visual options to modify, so you can scale it to your system's needs, which is pretty cool. A lot of the other issues I have with this game are just minor things that hopefully can be patched in or fixed up before launch. Like for starters, there's no way I can check the status screen to see how many kills or treasure I'm missing on a level. The combo counter resets way too quickly, removing any real chance of being able to rack up any serious combos. The only way I was able to even get this achievement for the 50 combo kills was because I think the game bugged out or something and it spawned all these enemies on top of me, and I was just able to shred them up with the chainsaw. There needs to be a higher pickup range for the coins in the game. Now, there is an upgrade to double this default, but it's still not enough. Coins, I think, should zap right towards you faster than shit through a goose. I shouldn't have to be running around looking for coins like a bogan at a bus station. Ending every fight with 30 seconds of running around picking up all the coins in the room is just a buzzkill. I think the layouts of the levels is a combination of RNG and handmade environments, but the placement of items and power-ups also seems completely randomized. And this can be an issue because I've had times when I've come across a really useful power-up only to open the next door and find the exit portal. Or I've found a power-up only after I've just cleared out an entire room. Some of the hit scanners in the game need a bit of a rework too. Like I'm talking losing 70 or 80 health in the blink of an eye. And the complete absence of traditional healing items like medkits just seems kind of odd. I think the game could also do with a bit more detail with the pixel work. At the moment it skates that thin line between being stylistic and just lacking any detail. Go and play another recent pixel shooter like Project Warlock for instance, which has a bit more detail in the sprite work, and weapons and enemies are pretty defined and recognisable as to what they're supposed to be. Now I understand this isn't a game being worked on by a bazillion people, and I know they haven't got time to intricately model and create all this artwork, but that kind of thing does make a pretty huge difference on how polished a game can feel. There's a 2 weapon limit as well, and you can upgrade this to 3 and eventually 4, but for a fair chunk of the start you're going to be limited to only 2. There's also the mechanic of aiming down sights and reloading certain weapons, which does seem juxtaposed with the game's old school shooting mechanics. It's just this weird mix of the old and the new, which might weird some people out. Now, I spoke to the developer, and apparently the plan is to sell this thing in early access for about $20, which lets you play all of the current content, which will take about 4 hours, and then obviously you get access to the full game when it's done. I think overall though, Nightmare Reaper is really fun. If you are getting a little bit sick of these FPS throwback titles, and to be honest, I can't really blame you at this point, well, this thing is hardly going to win you over. But if you want to just shoot shit up and have your screen covered in gory pixels, well, this thing is about as good as it gets. It's even got a soundtrack by Andrew Holsholt. Like, what else do you need? Oh, and good, my PayPal balance just updated. So with that, I'll leave you with this last little gameplay clip.